Okay, hello everyone and welcome to the session. Hopefully you've had lunch for those who are based in Singapore time zone, and hopefully you're not falling asleep. Otherwise, today's session will keep you awake. I'm really excited as well to be speaking today, and really it's about the experts and the panelists that we have here. As Debbie have introduced, today's topic is really understanding diverse minds, right? And this is personally very interesting the first time I heard it as well, because diversity is often, we think about things that we see, right? Someone of a different color, someone who looks different. But when we talk about diverse minds, it's something that we actually don't see sometimes. So we'd really love to hear, what our experts have to share with us today. All right, so our speakers for today, we have Chen Jun. I'm going to call him CJ, who's the Senior Manager and SG5 Ambassador. He's also worked in the public sector, really, experienced in that area. We also have Toyin, who heads up diversity and inclusion and well-being at Visa itself. And last but not least, Alyssa, who's the Associate Director of Wellbeing Health and Solutions in APAC at Aon itself. So I'm going to hand over the time to each one of them to just do a quick introduction of themselves before we start our discussion today. All right, let's go with CJ.
Thanks, Alicia. Hey, everyone, CJ here from Singapore and currently working in the public sector. Mental health and diverse mindsets has always been a huge passion of mine. And I think that having a diverse and inclusive mind has a lot of linkage to developing a global leadership mindset as well. I truly believe that diversity is not philanthropy, and it's a common sense and should be a business endeavor for everyone. So thank you, and looking forward to speak with my fellow panelists. And yeah, take it away, Alicia.
All right, amazing. Thanks, CJ. Okay, next up we have Toyin from Visa.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad to be here. I lead inclusion and diversity for Visa at Asia Pacific. I'm based here in Singapore. I think maybe I'll say a couple of interesting facts about me. I actually started my career off in finance and corporate strategy, and just over time really saw the importance of having people apply the business mindset to inclusion and diversity, and making sure that you are creating an environment where you get the best out of, your employees, and you allow them to work at their natural best. And that was a key motivation for me to move into this area. And over time, as I've picked up well-being as well as part of my responsibilities, I realized how important it is to have an environment where every employee feels empowered to operate at their natural best. Another fun fact, I have two kids, a boy and a girl, very, very different. So I love to talk about this topic of neurodiversity and thinking different. But thank you so much for having me.
Thanks so much, Toyin. And wow, amazing that you've completely switched sectors. I'm really glad to have you join today as well. And last but not least, let's hear from you as well, Alyssa.
Hey everyone, thanks again as well, Intellect, for having all of us here. We're very, very excited, I think, all of us to be on this panel. So I'm part of the Aon APAC Regional Wellbeing Team, and we do all things well-being, but all things DEI as well. And we design a lot of strategy for our clients, but on a personal level, or well, at least professional as well. Like Toyin, I started working in hospital. So I'm in a very, very different field now. And COVID actually really spurred me to switch careers because I experienced burnout myself as a frontliner in hospital. And yeah, very, very excited to be talking about a topic that I think everyone has some sort of experience in. And I think for all of us, we're really, really trying our best to create spaces where we celebrate everyone's uniqueness and also look at ways in which we can all belong as one together as well. So yeah, back to you, Alicia. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Alyssa. And I'm really excited that we have such diverse panels here with such diverse experiences to be able to share a little bit of their experience and their perspectives on this topic. So just a quick introduction about myself. I'll be the moderator for today to really facilitate our discussion. My background as well as in organizational psychology. So topics like, mental health, well-being, and how to help individuals and organizations thrive is really close to heart for me. All right, let's get started today with a little icebreaker question that I have. So to our panelists here, if you could choose a superpower that represents your unique way of thinking or working, what would it be and why? Maybe let's start with Alyssa, since we just heard from you as well.
Sure. So being a psychologist and also a consultant in well-being, I think something that I wish that I had more of would be a superpower called multidimensional empathy. And I think the panelists, we were all talking about this the other day as well. But with this superpower, I wish that I could see the world very clearly through someone else's eyes, but also really experience the different layers of thoughts and emotions and perspectives that they have simultaneously, so that I can understand them on a deeper level, and the different diverse ways and cultures that people have in their lives. And this obviously will just help me to navigate and craft more inclusive environments for everyone.
Wow, thanks. That's such a, purposeful superpower. Normally people are like, oh, I want to fly and I want to do this and that.
I wish I could fly too. So.
All right, amazing.
I wish I was a bird.
All right, let's hear from, let's go with Toyin. She looks like she's smiling and she's got something to share.
No, I'm smiling because when we all talked about this before, we found that our superpowers were quite similar. For me, I would choose harmony, and just the ability to immediately instill like harmony in whatever environment. So allowing people to overcome and resolve conflicts, to understand each other, to develop respect for each other, and to be able to communicate openly. I do this already for a living, but if I had a superpower that would make this so much easier, then it would be definitely beneficial to me.
Yeah, I love that. Wow, we really got very passionate people to serve the world here, harmony, right? And you're right, sometimes it's something that you already do through open communication, but a lot of times we may not be able to, influence or change how that other person thinks or how they behave. So if you could just snap harmony, wow. All right, let's hear from CJ. What would your superpower be?
Yeah, so on the shallow side, I thought teleportation would be really good because I can save a lot of money in traveling. But I think it's really similar to what Alyssa mentioned. I think the power of healing and empathy. So I remember when I was a teenager, I used to play a lot of RPG, like role-playing games, and there is these like mythical characters that call themselves empath. So what happened is that they would absorb other people's pain and then they will heal because they are a healing body themselves, right? And I think that superpower is really important and something that I really want. The reason is because I think the word empathy is quite overused in our society right now. It's very easy to say that you're empathetic, but most people that really use the word don't really know how other people really feel. And it's really dangerous to say that you do when you don't. So I think having that superpower would really break all that barriers and biases. And it's really a superpower that we all need, I think.
Nice. So yeah, really healing, taking away the pain, really going the extra mile, right? Like you said, I think some people get confused between empathy and what they call sympathy. So yeah, with that in mind, let's move on to learn a little bit about your experience. So similarly, could you tell us a time when the importance of diversity and inclusivity really clicked for you? Maybe let's start with CJ, since you already shared a little bit about that.
I think it was really when I learned, when I first joined, big tech like Facebook, and I really see how a lot of big tech companies value the importance of employee resource groups, things like women ad, pride ad, disability ad, and so forth. And for a lot of more traditional, like, traditional backgrounds, particularly in Singapore. If you look at very traditional businesses, they often see like, why are companies spending so much time and money on these things that may not be profit generating? But as I worked in a lot of these MNCs, and hearing a lot of talks from Sheryl Sandberg and all the likes of the leaders of DEI, I realized one thing, that as I mentioned in the earlier thing, diversity to them is not philanthropy; it is a business endeavor. Because based on a lot of the research, the more diverse and inclusive a company is, the more profits they're actually making, and employees are happier. So employee retention rate is also higher as well. So it should be a business endeavor, and that's when I realized that it's not just about having a good heart, but it's really common sense. You also want to build a space that you want to live in. So I think that it should be everyone's endeavor to know why we do what we do in the space of DEI.
Nice, I love that. So really taking it at a bigger picture level, at the organizational level, and like you said, a business endeavor itself, right? And really ties on to also what Toyin shared in her introduction, of what kind of brought her into diversity. So I would love to hear a little bit more from the individual perspective. And Alyssa, with your expertise, in neuropsych before, what shapes our way of thinking and working? And why is it that people who may have grown up in a similar environment or part of a similar community have such different ways of thinking?
Yeah, thanks for that, Alicia. I think, thinking about it from a psychological point of view, of course, we know that our way of thinking and working is really shaped by a combination of personal experiences, cultural background, education, how we're brought up, and also, personality and individual behavioral tendencies, right? So, people from similar environments or communities might share certain values or norms, but then other people might interpret and respond to those influences, and it can vary, right? And also, with regards to behavior, how we process information, how we problem solve, our emotional responses to things also really play a significant role. So like, for example, what I can think of is, at least, let's say two people who grew up in the same neighborhood, they might have really different levels of openness to, new experiences, and also different coping mechanisms, at least for stress and other things that happen to them. And I guess this is where we can go on and on about the whole nature versus nurture argument, right? But then I feel that also, obviously, exposure to different, like social interactions and personal challenges, it really shapes our way of thinking and working. But of course, in shared spaces like where we work, in our community, at home, these behavioral differences can really fuel creativity and innovation, and bring new perspectives to the table, right? So that's why I feel, encouraging diversity and diverse mindsets like this is really essential for fostering collaboration and of course, at the end of the day, the inclusion and well-being of everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Alyssa. So what I'm hearing is it's really that mix, like you say, of the nurture and nature, how that comes together. Some people are born in a certain way, but because of there are things,
Yeah.
in the environment, and sometimes it's things that are out of control, right? That may change our mindsets and behaviors or emotions. Yeah. So I think based on that, right, CJ, I think we've heard that you had some work with youth as well in the government or young children. How have you seen some of these environments that people are in really shape the way people think, especially in young children and youth?
So, like, I think earlier last year, the Singapore government has started out this initiative called the Youth Panel, where it was really the first time how the government wants to engage with youths to co-create policies together, right, on a number of things and so forth. So I was part of the Tech Hack Youth Panel, and And a lot of my peers and friends, many of them who are subject matter experts in trust and safety, for example, are also in it. But I also realized that a lot of these very more experienced youths, and by experience, I also mean the older ones, because youths in Singapore is defined by age 15 to 35. So it's a huge, huge spectrum there. And I think when a lot of these older youths, when they come in and they saw that, why is there so many like poly or fresh grad students, do they know anything about policies? Why are they here and all that? What I was really heartened by is that, the National Youth Council, who's organizing it, actually said, we definitely want a blend of subject matter experts as well as youths who may not be experienced, but they still have the passion to serve and to make changes. And the reason is also because just because a youth does not know anything about policy or does not come out of a fancy public policy school, does that mean that we take away the right from them to want to contribute to policy making, right? And to make impact at a national level. And when I see the crowd of youth panels that we attract, we really have all sorts. We have, female youths, ethnic minority youths, and it's not really just ticking the boxes, but it's really to see how each of them have a voice. And our government is really putting the Forward Singapore agenda into their practices. And I'm really happy to see that. And I think that it also gives a very educational experience for even the more experienced youths who are in the working professional, that, by looking at someone's CV, you shouldn't judge them based on the level of impact that they can bring to the table as well. So that's really a huge learning for me and a lot of my peers in this initiative.
Wow, thanks, CJ. I think lovely to hear that, and like you said as well, right? Empowering each one to feel that they have a voice, and that has to start, at an early stage, right? Because what we have observed as well in workplaces, where there's not enough psychological safety, where people are, not even daring to speak up about their own opinions, or not even daring to be authentically themselves, right? Which I think really tie on to what Alyssa was talking about. Which I guess, really leads us to our next part. And I would love to hear from the audience, what does diversity in the workplace mean to you? So yeah, feel free to use the chat box to engage. We'll have a look as well what we hear from the audience. So while you keep that in mind, I would also, I guess, love to hear from our panels as well. How can organizations, better recognize and support diverse ways in which people think and which they work, right? And why is it important? So let's hear a bit from Toyin with your, background experience, especially in the corporate space.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for the question. Well, I think one of the things that I always like to say is that diversity is inherent. People are different. Everybody is unique in the way that they think, in the way that, and the life experiences that they've had, in the way that they learn. And it's really important that, first of all, we all recognize that, whether it's in schools and then coming into the workplace. So I think it's very detrimental for an organization to assume that everybody is the same and not pay attention to different ways of thinking. But actually, from a corporate perspective, there's actually research that is in place. I know that both, I think it's Psychology Today and the Harvard Business Review have both published research that shows that when there are diverse people in the room, if you do not make the intentional effort to foster inclusion, the returns are actually detrimental. So I always tell people, like, we always hear of all this great research that says that when you have more diversity in your company, that there's better profitability, better innovation. But actually, that only happens when you intentionally include everybody in the room. Because without that inclusion and the fact that diversity is inherent, is actually detrimental. So that's one of the business cases that I always put forward to organizations, that in every single team, in every single part of the organization, people are different. And ultimately, organizations want to help and allow people to operate at their natural best. So really empowering people to show up how they are and be able to communicate about sort of the different ways that they think, how they operate at their natural best, what are the optimum conditions for them to thrive. I think it's very, very important, and it should be a foundational norm in an organization. And ultimately, you will start seeing that effectiveness that comes into sort of the team dynamics. And then over time, you will then start to see what we call the diversity bonus, which is the promises that all this diversity research has made to organizations for many years.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack. I'm also trying to, process, but it does sound like we've talked about, a lot of the benefits of diversity and inclusion, but that only comes when you have both the diversity efforts and also inclusion, right? And as you were describing it, it really reminded me a bit of an iceberg analogy, right? Where diversity efforts is really what you see at the top. You could have quotas, you could have your, diversity days and, initiatives that, you organize and see. But you talked about inclusive practices, which, covers maybe a bit of mindsets, how we behave, how we treat each other, and how do we help create that culture and environment where people really feel like they belong and they can feel like they can be themselves. All right, so I think we've seen quite a number of responses. So I'm just going to have a look as well. Really love what I'm seeing here, and embracing differences, giving trust and respect, right? Encouraging different viewpoints, like what we shared. It means accepting people from different backgrounds, culture, so you avoid herd mentality. So amazing. Thank you to the audience as well for contributing your thoughts around that. All right, so I think based on this topic, we talked a little bit about diversity and in the workplace. So I think one of the key takeaways, definitely, which I have also, really heard, is that neurodiversity is not just about accommodating differences, right? But it's really about leveraging and harnessing these unique strengths to create more dynamic, effective teams, communities, and organizations itself. Okay, I've got another question as well from our audience here, and I guess with our panelists here, as I follow up with the next question, feel free to also, leverage on the audience's poll and responses in our next question. So, to our audience, how familiar are you with the concept of neurodiversity in your workplace? So we've got a couple of options: very familiar, somewhat familiar, or not familiar. Okay. All right. So, interesting. So actually majority are not familiar. Wow, I can see the panelists smiling. I think they're very happy to start giving a lecture on this. But I'm also very mindful of time. But okay, I think it's quite stable that most are not familiar, followed by maybe somewhat familiar. So very few, about only 5% in our audience today feel like they're very familiar. So yeah, maybe just for our audience here, for something like neurodiversity that may not be as commonly discussed, right? What do you think are some of those challenges organizations may face when they're trying to create these inclusive environments itself? So yeah, let's start with Alyssa to open up about this question.
Hi guys. Yeah, I think there's a couple of things here. And to Toyin's point, something that we really talk about, and which I wanted to start off first writing on what Toyin said about us having to actually take action. Within well-being, we always talk about this as well. And of course, well-being and DI are should be looked at together as one piece. And I think organizations don't realize the cost of doing nothing, right? And just sitting there and letting challenges, well-being and DEI challenges fester. The more you leave it and ignore it, the more it's not going to go away, and the worse it will become. And I think, something that a lot of organizations face, and it's not just within DI, I think it's across the board when we talk about, mental health as well, even certain physical conditions, right, as we know, is stigma. So stigma is a humongous factor that, plays a big role across organizations that we're trying to fight, of course. And that's where I think many of the companies that I've seen really dive into well-being and DEI programs and policies start at building awareness and education. So that's one thing I see that organizations may face a challenge with because they're not sure where to start. And that's why we have people like Toyin and CJ and myself to help start that journey. The other one as well is also willingness to be open and accepting, right? I think especially in Singapore, we're still quite a conservative country, as many of the Asian countries are, and there's certain topics that people may not be comfortable to be discussing. So creating a safe space, again, as you said, Alicia, just now, psychologically safe space where people are comfortable to be talking about different dimensions and different aspects of diversity and inclusion, I think is a really, really important way to kickstart battling those challenges. Yeah.
Thanks, Alyssa. I think you covered quite a bit there, right? From what I'm hearing, there's different levels of those challenges, right? Maybe at the start, it's just awareness, right? And I think from what we see in our poll as well, a lot of people may not even be aware, right? But then after there's awareness, sometimes there's stigma that comes around, right? Or after you've gone past that, maybe some people have that awareness, but as an organization, they're not aware to start. Or like you said, then the willingness. Curious to hear from you, Toyin, as well. With your years of experience, in the corporate space, are those challenges, what you see, or anything additional to add on from there?
Yes. I first of all started with just popping the definition of neurodiversity in the chat, just to make sure that everybody sort of understands what we're talking about. But basically, the fact that, I think the poll has shown that many times, it is awareness. People don't even know. And as professionals, we have to restrict ourselves from just jumping into some, D&I concept and start rolling out initiatives when we haven't really ensured that people have that foundational awareness. So really creating that mindset of we're all learning together, we don't know everything, really also creates a psychologically safe space for the people who, don't know, but oftentimes they feel like they're expected to know. So they'll often pretend like they do know. To be able to say, actually, I don't know. Let's all, build the awareness together. And as you're going along, making sure that you are centering the voices of that particular group. So when you're working on neurodiversity, create the space where people that are neurodiverse can actually speak up and be a part of the work that you're doing, and allow them to shape the story that is told about them being neurodiverse in the organization. I always say, definitely make the efforts to celebrate them, to celebrate their unique ways of working as you're building that awareness, and really building trust so that, we tackle some of the things, like Alyssa said, in Singapore, in many of the Asian countries, some of the key aspects of neurodiversity are still stigmatized, right? And you see it all the way from even school, when kids are still going through their education. So really making sure that when you're telling the story, you're putting a positive light and you're celebrating those differences and ensuring that people are seeing the positives of having that sort of diversity on the team, I think always creates the right environment, to build on your journey of being more inclusive.
Nice. Wow. Okay. Love it how we're already starting talking about action. Our action part is going to be later. So definitely love to unpack a little bit more about that as well. And I think what you shared really echoed back to what, CJ was sharing at the start, right? How do we empower even from the youth age to start feeling that they can voice out, right? So yeah, I think that was amazing how that kind of just came together as well. All right, so next one that we have before we go into really how to take action, which I think Toyin already shared some tips on how to create that learning mindset. Hey, we're all in this together, right? It's something that's new. To our audience today, drop a response in the chat box. What are some ways your respective communities honor and celebrate neurodiversity? And hopefully, from our discussion up to now, you've had a better understanding of what neurodiversity is. And maybe at the workplace, it's still starting, it's still new, maybe something that we can reflect on, right? In the community, how have you felt, belonged, and how have you felt that you could be yourself, right? What are the ways that they really honor, appreciate neurodiversity? All right, let's give a couple of seconds for our audience to kind of type their responses. Okay, and I think there are some questions in the chat as well, which we'll tackle later at the end, I think. Okay, so we will try to tackle at the end if we have some time. Otherwise, yeah, we'll definitely take notes of those questions, and maybe, you know, along the discussion itself, some of those may be answered. Okay, so some people wrote, I think celebrating neurodiversity begins with respect and understanding of other cultures. Yeah, I think definitely echoing again back to our superpower of the empathy, right? It's really starting to understand from that other person's perspective, sharing of perspectives, right? And then I also start to see some of the beyond just understanding, then the communication part, right? Openly discussing without any judgment. Yeah, really love that. Okay, so maybe some of our, you know, audience is still kind of thinking. Let's move on in a bit more action steps, right? How do policies, right, whether at the organizational or at the government level, play a role in supporting inclusive practices? And what examples have we seen that work well? So yeah, maybe the question, I'll start with CJ, especially with your experience a bit more in that governance space, or, you know, in the communities. What have you seen worked?
Yeah, I think from what I'm really seeing, you know, I think it's really important to know that policy making is a really long process, right? And so while we do have a lot of passionate individuals who want to really change policies for the better, I think it's also important to know, like, you know, when you see a problem statement, is policy change necessary, or is it something at a ground level that we can do? You know, I think it's the same debate of, do I need an app or do I just need to improve a feature, right? It's all about, you know, being really strategic with your bandwidth and to create the most impact, you know, out of it, right? And I think the second one is when you want to be taken really seriously, when it comes to whether it's, you know, talking to members of government, like policymakers and so forth, it's really important to also have a lot of existing initiatives that you have done already. So it could be ground up initiatives. It could also be in the grassroots, what you hear, the sentiments that you hear from the ground. And so all of that would help to build a data set, for example, that tells you that, you know, X number of individuals, you know, suffer from this as a result of that. So when you are able to articulate that, I think that that would make more sense in terms of what you're trying to fight for in the change making sense. So this, I think the most effective kind of formula or style that I've seen. But of course, with that being said, while you're doing things at a ground level, be prepared for a lot of pushbacks, right? And it really depends on how willing are you able to hustle, you know, to create those changes as well. One of the example I can share is I'm part of this national movement called the Singapore Leaders Network. It's found by HCLI, Human Capital Leadership Institute, and EDB. And it's all about the movement of developing global leadership mindset among Singaporeans, and for Singaporeans to want to work abroad, etc. And when I first pitched about this collaboration that I want to do with them and SG Enable, which is kind of the PWD, personal disability arm of Singapore as well, a lot of the business stakeholders were really shocked. They'll be like, what has that got to do with global leadership mindset? And obviously our audience here would find it shocking like me, but to the traditional pigeonhole business leaders, they really don't get it sometimes, because all they know about business, global businesses is probably like, how many markets can I tackle? You know, how many profits can I make when I've conquered this and that market? And it takes a lot of process to kind of educate them, to let them know that, you know, inclusive hiring and having more persons with disabilities working for your company is actually a part of branding yourself as a global leader, or to develop a global leadership mindset in your organization. And we actually had persons with disabilities, working professionals, to be on the panel to share with them what inclusive hiring looks like in their eyes. And I think after that, we actually got a lot of local businesses who signed up for the inclusive hiring pledge, for example. So that was quite a good ground level success. And these are really the credits that I'm trying to build in order to promote, bigger rights, stronger rights for our persons with disabilities, Singaporeans in our nation as well. So I'll say this is an example that I can think of.
All right, thanks so much, CJ. Okay, maybe very quickly before we go on to our Q&A, I would love to hear, if you don't mind, one sentence from Alyssa and Toyin. What do you think in organizations, leaders, managers, or employees can do to play a part in neurodiversity? Maybe we'll start with Alyssa. Sorry, I realized I didn't call the name, but yes, Alyssa. Either
no worries. I was gonna ask. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, no worries. I think so we're talking managers, we're talking leaders here, right? And I think, well, the only line I can say is they play a huge role, very important role, not just in DI, but also the overall holistic well-being of all employees at any respective organization. I feel like they are the key connectors between neurodivergent and neurotypical employees and the wider organization, right? Because they are the advocates, or they should be advocates for a diverse and inclusive and safe workplace, and also, of course, to provide support, and they're the ones that can fight for example, different accommodations that can be made for people that need it. And I think on top of that, having said that, managers and leaders also need to look out for themselves, right? Because we all know, and we heard this at day one of the Intellect Mental Health Festival, where leaders need to put on their own oxygen masks as well. But at the end of the day, they play a huge they can play a very big, significant role in someone's life that is experiencing it differently than someone else in an organization, because they have the ability and the power to put things in place to make that person feel more belong. So yeah, sorry, that was not one sentence, but over to you.
I know but it's okay. I know, Toyin, actually the first question that I think I have fits really well with your experience. So maybe I'll throw that one to you. So I'll read it out. So we've got a question from the audience. Curious to know what our speakers think about inclusive practices, policies, and activities that just feel like leaders are hitting a checkbox or feels like tokenism. How can we as employees approach this? All right, so let's hear from Toyin. What do you think?
I think it's a great question. And because of my background in business, I tend to approach sort of my work in DEI as you would any business problem, right? So really starting from like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? And analyzing based on the problem you're trying to solve, what are the proven interventions or the things that you need to put in place to tackle that problem? And so I always steer away from people doing things because everybody else is doing it. And every time I'm in a conversation regarding a DEI topic, I always say, can we step back and really make sure that we understand what the problem is that we're trying to solve? So for some organizations, when it comes to neurodiversity, they might realize that they already have neurodiverse employees, which we see in this part of the world. People will mask and they will just kind of blend in like everybody else, but then they start to struggle, right? So if that's the problem, that you already have a talent pool that needs to be supported, then you start to make sure that you have inclusive practices that would allow them to thrive. And like I said, I love reading research on this. Research shows that when you have practices and policies that are inclusive of a particular group, it's actually more inclusive for all, right? And it creates the foundation of psychological safety for all your employees to perform at their best. So the benefits are exponential. So starting from there. The second part of it could be, you could realize that, well, I actually don't have neurodiverse people in my organization, and there might be various reasons why. If that is the problem, then you need to go back and look at your hiring policies, your recruitment policies, and your recruitment practices to see if there's anything that is either discriminatory or anything that naturally sort of doesn't get you that talent. But I think ultimately at the end of the day is really recognizing the value that people are bringing into the organization based on these neurodiversities, whether it's lived experiences, whether it's medical conditions, different ways of thinking, learning styles. If truly you want to be in a successful organization that serves the community and is profitable in that community, you have to have a workforce that represents that community, to hear from them, to be able to actually do that. So really, I think understanding the value and tackling the problem are the two key things to make sure it's not just a checkbox exercise.
All right, nice, Toyin. Sorry, I lost my unmute button. I know I'm mindful of time. I think quite a few actually we have tackled in terms of during our discussion itself. So I'll end off with our last question here. And maybe this one, I'll get Alyssa to share this based on your background, in that neurodiversity or neuropsych and mental health, right? How can one, be able to determine whether personnel with neurological atypical patterns of thoughts or behaviors will not manifest violence in their interactions? That's a handful, but yes, how do we know that they will not manifest violence in those interactions?
So, yeah, thanks so much for that question, and I think that's a very valid one. I think we're all also trying. I mean, us as leaders in the field, we're sitting here and we're still learning about these things every day, right? And I think that the first thing that I always encounter, and this is from a lived experience with an autistic person in my prior organization. And yes, I remember that's the correct term that I'm using, because they like identity first terms, right? And something that I would say is human beings are very reactive. We like to solve problems very quickly. And when someone is behaving differently to us, we tend to jump the gun and want to solve the issue. But we never know, as you said, Alicia, there's a whole iceberg too. We never know what's going on beyond the surface. So I would say, let's not make assumptions about, every autistic person or neurodivergent person having violent tendencies. There's a whole spectrum, and there's a whole line of severity with different conditions. But I would say read up on different neurodivergent experiences that people have had. Most often than not, people behave and react to certain environments because it makes them feel uncomfortable, and sometimes those reactions may be a lot stronger than others. But if you ever encounter a situation where that's the case, you can always call on someone else that's more experienced to come in and diffuse the situation. But I would say that at the end of the day, learning for ourselves and education is key around these conditions, so that we can better support neurodivergent people in the workforce. And it's definitely not the case that every one of these conditions has any violent tendencies. So yeah, read up. And I'm still learning too. I'm learning every day about conditions, even as a clinician. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much. Okay, I know we are over time by now, but it was lovely to hear everyone. I've really taken away a lot as well, right? Starting with awareness all the way to how we really still continue to learn and understand, right, as our community or organization, and how do we then really take action after that. All right, with that, I'm going to hand it over back to Devi to close us off for our session.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Alicia. And I think, wow, what a fantastic conversation indeed. I think CJ, Alyssa, and Toyin, really thank you so much for sharing your insights on creating environments where everyone can thrive. I think everyone in the channel and the chat were thriving on your conversations and insights itself. And yes, thank you so much, Alicia, for moderating this wonderful conversation as well. We are almost, at the end of the festival, but there's just one last session coming up that you definitely don't want to miss. So do stick around for Move, Eat, and Budget Better, small habits for a holistically better life. So how do you join that? That's exactly what I'm going to share with you. So just join that session by heading to your inbox where you would have received the email reminder for this event and click on the unique link. You would have seen our feedback QR code here. If not, don't worry, we will be actually sending it to you later as well so you can share with us your feedback on this session. Thank you so much, and let's continue creating these inclusive spaces for everyone to shine. Thank you all. I will see you in the next session. Bye.